Welcome back, everyone. This is week 13 and the start of our final unit. So, our final unit will focus on the medieval world, and more specifically, our theme for this unit is identity in the medieval world. We're going to see how identity was not as clear cut as we like to think it was back then. We're going to look today at the Byzantines and how they saw themselves as Romans. We're going to explore different religions such as early Christianity, Islam, and what it meant to live in an empire, both Islamic and Christian. And we're also going to, as time permits, look at the history and culture of the Jewish people within Europe. All right, so one of the big announcements that I have for this unit is that I have decided that we will not have a Unit 3 artboard project. And the reason for this is that I am well aware of how difficult it is for any of us right now to concentrate on schoolwork. I know a lot of you are essential workers and you still have to go out there and work. I know that many of you are taking care of loved ones at home. And so I'm hoping that by removing our third artboard project, this gives you a little bit more time to finish up your exercises, to catch up on any late work that you might have, all with the goal of you finishing this course with a good grade and being able to kind of move on from this class into the next semester. We've had so many challenges this semester that I'm just trying to make things a little bit easier for all of us. All right, so let's get into our class content. So today we're looking at the Byzantine Empire. And what's going to be fascinating is that the Byzantine people are not going to call themselves Byzantine. They are going to identify as Romans. So although I'm going to start off talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, the people that were living in the Byzantine Empire, the people that we're going to be exploring today and their artwork, they considered themselves Roman and they considered their art Roman art. But first, before we start talking about them, let's talk a little bit about the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, I mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago, it's never one thing that leads to the fall of a great empire. It's usually a number of things that happen simultaneously over a short period of time. So in about 164, we have the Antonian plague that spreads throughout Rome. And I don't really have to go in depth to explain how a pandemic like this can really destroy the economy, morale, and it can really bring a lot of disruption to an empire like Rome, especially when people had no idea what was causing disease and death in their communities. Then in 180, we have the end of the Pax Romana. So the Pax Romana, as I mentioned before, is a period of peace and of prosperity for Rome. This is where it ends. Now, in the year 300, we have Diocletian divide the empire into two, and this is really the beginning of the end because emperors are no longer able to maintain that large, vast empire that we talked about before. Now, in 313, Constantine legalizes Christianity. This is huge, and we're going to talk about this later on. Then in 410, the Visigoths sack Rome. In 455, the Vandals sack Rome. And it continues like this throughout the empire, especially in the West, where we see the barbarians attacking and really taking control of what used to be the Roman Empire. And so we usually give the date of 476 for the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire, where we're going to be looking at today, really goes on for another 1,000 years or so. Now, Eastern Rome, a survivor society. So, what caused the Western Roman Empire to fall and then the Eastern Roman Empire to survive and then later on flourish? Well, Constantine is going to establish an eastern capital at Byzantium, which was kind of a small fishing town. I bet he's going to rename it Constantinople. And there's several reasons for the survival of this great capital and of the larger Eastern Roman Empire. So we're going to see that the East had a higher level of technology. They also had fewer nomadic invasions, partly because of geography and partly because they had a stronger military force. They're also going to have a more prosperous economy, better commerce. They are strategically placed in a spot where a lot of trade networks meet. And so this is going to be incredibly important for the Eastern Roman Empire. And let's not forget the importance of a strong leader. What led to the fall of the Western Roman Empire really also had a lot to do with a series of not so great leaders. And in the East, we see more competent leaders at the helm, which is really going to help. All right. Let's see here. So here we have Constantinople. Right? So these are some maps of the different invasions. So you have the Huns, the Visigoths, the Vandals, and as I said, we're going to talk more about them later on. But you can see how this is a very strategic point that we have here. All right, so this new Rome in Constantinople is going to become the political, economic, and cultural heart of this new empire. Remember, they're seeing it as a continuation of the Roman Empire, but really it's the start of something new. This is going to be the largest city in Europe with nearly 1 million people, right? And it's going to become an important trade city with Western anchor of Eurasian trade routes. So it's going to be right on those Silk Roads that we had mentioned before. Now, we're going to just jump right in and talk about perhaps one of the most important emperors of the Byzantine Empire, and that is Justinian. So Justinian reigned from around 527 to 565. And during this time, Justinian was able to grow the empire to its largest size. And Justinian really dreamed of conquering all of what had been Rome before and kind of bringing back the great Roman Empire from history. He wanted, like I said, to rebuild the Roman Empire, and he did temporarily regain North Africa, Italy, and parts of southern Spain. Now, Justinian is fascinating because he comes into power in a very fascinating way. He was not born into the nobility, he was born as a peasant, and through a series of events, he is able to rise to the level of emperor. And one of the things to talk about when we talk about Justinian is that he wasn't particularly like a great guy, and you're going to see this with the Nika riots. He is absolutely has the capacity to be ruthless, right? Which you needed to be back then as an emperor. But he also surrounds himself with really smart people, and he takes counsel from them. He was able to gain all of this land because he had a very competent military leader. And then he also had his wife, Theodora, who, for me, was the mastermind behind Justinian. She had considerable amounts of power. She came again to the throne to become empress in an unconventional way. She was like a bear dancer, an actress, and reportedly also a sex worker. But Justinian fell in love with her, and he married her, and he basically raised her to the level of empress, co-empress. And so they are going to be this power couple that is going to expand the empire, but they're also going to be involved in what is going to be the rebuilding of Rome. Now, this rebuilding of, Constantinople. They thought it was Rome. So this rebuilding of Constantinople, and this rebuilding of Constantinople really happens because they make a lot of mistakes along the way, and they have to put down an uprising, the Nika riots, which you're going to watch in a video I'm going to show you. And then the other thing that we need to remember for Justinian is he wrote Justinian's law code. It's a code that has been used as inspiration for many modern law codes. All right, so here is the Byzantine Empire under Justinian. You can see how he really expanded the empire. So a little bit about Byzantine culture. So the cultural foundations of the Byzantine tradition come from Christian beliefs. So at this point, it is a Christian empire, right? And because of this, all gladiatorial fights are outlawed. And so what we're going to get instead is going to be the chariot races, right? They're also going to be founded on Greek learning. So while in the West, Roman Latin was the most important language, here we're going to see a focus on Greek as the main language of the Byzantine Empire and more of an influence from Greek culture. We're also going to see an adoption and building upon Roman engineering. The Byzantine Empire had state-organized schools and widespread literacy. So this was an empire that was quite advanced for its time. And the chariot races, the Nika riots of 532, again, you're going to watch that in a video, but it really emphasizes the importance of chariot racing in Byzantine culture because you had these two factions, the blues and I believe it's the greens or something like that. It's the blues and the reds or the blues and the greens. I always forget. And each side is going to be both a team, like a sports team, but they're also going to be a political faction. And we're going to see how these two gang up on the emperor and the way that the emperor eventually puts down this riot via an incredibly ruthless way. But after this riot, the entire city lays in ruins, and it's going to be up to Justinian and Theodora to rebuild Constantinople. I'm going to skip this one. Now, here are some of the things that to keep in mind when you think Byzantine architecture. What does it look like? So with the exception of the Hagia Sophia, which we're going to look at in a few minutes, Byzantine architecture is not known for its big size. These are not huge buildings. They're pretty intimate. Again, aside from the Hagia Sophia. The interiors are made out of colored marble, shimmering mosaics, frescoes, and low domes with windows around the bases. So lots of domes, just keep that in mind. Early Byzantine style had plain exteriors, and middle to late Byzantine styles had a little bit more decoration on the exterior. And I have a couple of examples for you here. So this is one of these domes that I was talking about with the windows all around the edges. And this right here is a pendentive. And the pendentive was a technological and engineering marvel. I know it doesn't look like that amazing of a thing, but it's going to allow the use of arches to support this large dome. This is the dome of the Hosios Lucas, and you can see the form of these churches, right? Because the houses of worship are now churches. And this is the Byzantine style, which is that large dome, usually in the center, surrounded by the semicircular arches, which help keep this dome from collapsing. So they are really support structures. Now, the Hagia Sophia is perhaps the most famous piece of Byzantine architecture or art in general. right? The name means holy wisdom. We actually have the names of the architects here. And my favorite part of this story is that the original architects were professors. And I can't even imagine somebody asking me to build a gigantic church because, as you can imagine, professors do not have the experience to actually build things. And as you can imagine, they built this amazing dome. And because they were not architects, they were professors, they got really ambitious and they created this beautiful masterpiece. And then the dome collapsed. And then one of their sons had to go and fix it. And so this was built in just 5 years. Again, back then, if the emperor said, I want a gigantic, massive church built within 5 years, it got built. Right? Now, one of the things from this picture to remember is the minarets on the side were originally not part of the design. Right? When Constantinople gets taken over and becomes Istanbul, of course, this church becomes a mosque. Now, in terms of design, it's going to combine the central and basilica plan, and we'll talk more about the form of churches. You can either have a central plan where they're a little bit more square, like in this one, or a basilica plan, which is what we're going to see in the traditional Western Gothic cathedrals. Okay? Now, the dome rests on 4 arches, and those carry the weight using pendentives that we talked about. And this allows for taller and lighter and more economical domes. Now, these are some images of domes. Now, the one on the right, that is the Pantheon, and you watched a video on that, I believe, last week or the week before that. And then on the left, we have the dome of the Hagia Sophia. So again, kind of ignore the Islamic calligraphy that you see here because this is the modern museum of the Hagia Sophia. And you can still see the original mosaics on parts of the buildings, right? Many of these were covered up during the Islamic use of the building, but we can still see some of the original mosaics. And you can see where, again, we have a huge dome, but its construction and its engineering is very different. These are some of the capitals that are used at the Hagia Sophia. So the capitals are also slightly different than those that we saw in the Roman Empire. Here is another shot of the Hagia Sophia. Oh, I'm going to skip some of this. This is from when I give it in person, so let's skip that. We talked a little bit about the plans for these Byzantine style churches. And we call this the central plan, like I mentioned before. And we believe that this plan was taken from either the Roman mausoleum or other types of buildings, such as the baths, which you also looked at a couple weeks ago. So again, this is the plan of the Hagia Sophia, and on the right you have the plan for St. Mark's in Venice, which is also a Byzantine style church. Hopefully we'll get a chance to look at that one too. Now, in terms of Byzantine art, the easiest to recognize is going to be mosaics. So lots of glittering golden mosaics all on the walls. So remember how we looked at frescoes for a very long time? The Greek Empire had frescoes, the different city-states in Greece had frescoes, the Roman Empire had frescoes, and now what we're going to be seeing are mosaics. You can see the outside is very simple though. And here we start seeing depictions from the Bible being put on the walls of these churches, again, using these tiny little bits of glass that are then painstakingly pasted on to the wall so that they glitter when the light hits them. This is Santa Apollinare in Ravenna, Italy. This is another of these very traditional Byzantine churches. San Vitale. I'm going to skip some of these. I don't want to make this too long, but you can see here again the use of these golden mosaics. And that's going to be whenever you go into a church and you see all the golden mosaics, you can immediately tell that it is influenced by Byzantine culture. Oh, here's St. Mark's Cathedral. And so here we see the Byzantine style reaching Europe, right? Western Europe, at least. And we can tell that this is Byzantine by the use of the domes. And this was built upon even later. You can see some of these arches here are Gothic. But the original domes and the decorations inside are very much Byzantine. Plan for St. Mark's. And I don't know why I don't have the interior of that one. But here is another place where Byzantine culture infiltrates, and that is the newly formed Kiev Rus. So the Kiev Rus, this new empire, which, as you can imagine, is going to later become Russia, is looking for a new religion, so a state religion. And so the emperor kind of he looks at Islam, and it's too far removed from the daily lives of people in Kiev Rus. It's a desert people have really nothing to do with people living in very Eastern Europe and in parts of Asia. And then he looks at Roman Catholicism, but he's like, I don't want to be under the power of the Pope. Like, that's not my thing. But then he looks at the mosaics in the Eastern Empire. He looks at these churches and he thinks that they are the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. And so he ends up adopting Eastern Orthodox traditions and the Byzantine style. And this is why, when you look at Russian architecture, it has those very distinctive domes, and it's also going to have artwork such as icons. The style is very similar to the Byzantine style. Okay. So here we're going to see how later on the Byzantine Empire is going to be the gateway for a lot of the Crusades. Right? You can see all of these newly formed empires, and they are going to bring in people through the Byzantine Empire. There's going to be a lots of fights in Constantinople as people try to get to Jerusalem. Let's see here. Now, what we're going to see in the Byzantine Empire is it doesn't last very long after Justinian in terms of being a very prosperous and rich empire. Like I said, it takes a very strong, almost ruthless ruler who is also surrounded by very wise people. And that's not always what happens in history. And so what we're going to see in the Byzantine Empire is that it's going to experience a decline of urbanism, very similar to what happened in Rome. The middle class people are going to move out of the cities and into rural areas. And then we're going to have a huge gap between wealth of the aristocracy and the poverty of peasants. Now, in 1453, the Ottoman Empire is going to surround and eventually conquer Constantinople. The Christian city is going to be renamed Istanbul, and it's going to become the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, again, is always going to be at odds with Western Europe. Okay, so here are some of the reasons that historians put out there for the fall of Constantinople and of the Byzantine Empire to the Ottoman Turks. Among them, disease. We've seen that this is a constant in all of our lectures. The rise of Islam, and we're going to talk about the military rise of Islam later on. The Crusades, which we talked about a little. More riots, and a lot of palace intrigue.